Hello, good evening, and welcome to my Friday night show. And I've got someone really special for you today, Lorraine Crooks. Now, Lorraine and I have known each other for about 9 months now, Lorraine?
Yeah, say about that.
And we've been talking about doing this for a while, and we've actually managed to get diaries together now. So that's why I'm kind of really happy that we can get this on tape, because I think it's a subject that many of the people who've leapt in on this or who've joined me before will have a really keen interest in it, because the way let me not mince my words too much, but the way our ability to perform a sexual function is as important to me at my age as, quite frankly, it was to me when I was in my 20s. And I guess that's not an uncommon experience, Lorraine.
No.
Really, I always start off with, it's a bit out of the ordinary for a Finding Your Purpose show. But in tune with that, I do want to start off with that first question, which is, there's normally an event or a trigger or an emotional happening that moves you from where you were doing what you were doing to what you're doing at the moment. And you've clearly found your purpose in doing this. So can you tell us a bit about your moment?
Yeah, so my moment as a kind of epiphany, deciding to move and change my career, was probably about 5-6 years ago. So sexual energy, sex, intimacy, pleasure has always been something I've kind of struggled with. I've sought after. I've always been kind of on a mission to really get to grips with what it meant for me, and even kind of, connecting with partners and things. And it's always been of interest. But I had a double life for a good 20 years where I was working in secondary education and higher education. So I had my role as a teacher, and many of us can relate to having roles in life, in employment, in our families. But also I had this interest in sex and intimacy. And for me, that showed up as being interactive in swinging and bondage and domination and kink. So from sort of teacher to being in those bubbles was quite an extreme. And actually, I found it really hard to manage, all the upbringing of being a good Christian girl and all the cultural values and the media and everything else. What I deemed what I was doing was kind of wrong. And I was worried about the perception of it if my colleagues found out. And it actually made me physically ill, as often these things do. Emotions often lead to our physical health. I had alopecia, irritable bowel, and at the time of going, that's enough, I just don't want to do teaching anymore because this life is so important. I didn't actually know what I was going to do, but I had decided I wanted to kind of find out a bit more about me, maybe heal some of the journey that I'd been on in exploring that, where maybe consent hadn't been, really healthy, and just kind of take some time for me. So I did that, and then I ended up on a tantric journey, exploring tantra massage and coming to be a tantra teacher, and just realized how important it was to me. But actually in that journey of going to become a mindfulness coach, tantra, and all the other things I explored, I realized that actually it was the one thing that had held me together in my life and was really important. And then talking to other people, realized how important it was, but also that other people suffered the same fear, shame, sense of self-judgment around it as well. So I then went on for that to be my thing, is now sexual empowerment, and helping other people to step into their power, because it affects us in so many ways.
Given these two worlds, the world of teaching and the worlds of what you did outside of teaching, were very different, and clearly you had a wall between the two. Do you think just before we move on to the story, because I think it's an interesting point to pick up on, just before we move on to that, do you think that sense of sense of disquiet, or that sense that moment that you had when it all became too much, that was as much to do with having to keep these two separate? It's like your life was compartmentalized, in a way that wasn't in tune with who you were.
No, 100%. You kind of, you're almost I felt like I was living my life wearing a lot of coats. You know, you kind of have your mum coat, your teacher coat. You know, we all have this. And actually at the underlining of all of that is we are sexual human beings. And whether it's about a relationship with ourselves or with someone else, it's the one part of my life that I felt so much shame about. But at the same time was also the part of my life, which is why now I work with a lot of business professionals. It was the one part of my life that I realized I couldn't have managed and been such a good teacher. And I was a good teacher. I had top results. I did a lot of extracurricular stuff for the kids outside of school. You know, I loved what I did, but I think that was what fed it, because I had spaces in my life that I could connect with who I really was. I could connect to sex and intimacy, whatever that looked like for me. It was almost like I got my fix of adrenaline, dopamine, endorphins, which put me in a really good space. So I could then go and do all the other things I had to do, all the other hats and the coats I had to wear in the rest of my life. And I was, you know, I realized that. And I think I knew I couldn't give that part of my life up, because that had fueled me to overcome many challenges in life. Whereas for a lot of other people, it kind of does the reverse. They ignore that part of their life. And, you know, life becomes challenging in that area. Every day is just the same. Struggle to really know what our purpose is in life, because we don't have that connection to ourselves and sex and intimacy and pleasure. And that can, you know, that isn't just necessarily, you know, intercourse and actual sexual acts. Sometimes it's just enjoying a nice bubble bath, kiss and cuddle on the way out, on the way out to work, connecting with a partner, having a hug, movie night, you know, all of that stuff, where we just taking time to find pleasure in our own lives, in our body, and in each other. That, you know, that human connection is part of our survival.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And, you know, I do want to make this relevant. Obviously, I deal with type 2 diabetes, and in dealing with my own type 2 diabetes, I did, I hope it won't be too much of a shock for my audience, but I did have problems with having sex at that time. Erectile dysfunction, and I'm using these medical terms because they're easier to use, really, but erectile dysfunction, and you know, simple thing that I was offered. In fact, I went to the doctor and I asked for the pill. I asked for that Blue Diamond pill, Viagra, because I just heard it was wonderful, and you know, that was the one I wanted. But winding back now, because I don't understand so much about how sexual dysfunction might represent in women as well as men. Can you outline for my audience how type 2 diabetes does affect you in terms of sex?
Yeah, 100%. And type 2 diabetes has a huge impact, as other health conditions. But type 2, I work with a lot of people that have been struggling with different types of diabetes, but type 2 in particular. And for men, it does 100% show up as erectile dysfunction. Sometimes that's short term, sometimes it's not constant, it's just at certain periods of time. And the same as premature ejaculation, low libido, lack of self-confidence, because then you get stuck in that cycle. If it doesn't quite work once, then you're telling yourself it doesn't happen again. And, you know, the self-confidence drops, and there's all the psychology behind that as well. So it's not just on a physical level as an impact of the diabetes, but also the psychological, that it's known to be an issue with diabetes. So therefore it's going to happen to me. So we end up with a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. For women, low libido again, dryness, soreness, the psychological stuff that goes with it for a female as well. And so for both male and female, it can be a real physical challenge, because for men it's about having an erection, and for women it's just some discomfort that can be caused because of the type 2 diabetes does cause dryness. It can cause restrictive muscle in that area, so it can become uncomfortable, and low libido. Which, when you're in a relationship and you've had a high libido and you've had a beautiful relationship, both of those things for men and women can be absolutely catastrophic in a relationship on so many levels, because you're not able to connect to yourself or someone else in the way that you have done before.
And you've got very strong memories of the before and the now, and you know, there's a sense of loss and regret, isn't there, at you know, what you've lost as a result of this condition. As you I think you know a little bit about my story, but I worked very hard to get rid of all my type 2 diabetes medications. So I was on insulin, I was on metformin, I was on a number of other oral medications. And I reversed it so that I'm now diet control only. I'm still type 2 diabetic, but I have no medications now. And as you can imagine from that story, I'm not a great fan of medication because they all have side effects in some way. Now, at the time I popped that little blue pill, I wasn't much concerned about the side effects, but I know for me, when I took it, one of the biggest impacts that I wasn't aware of was actually the impact on my heart, because I could feel my heart racing. And, you know, while it was exciting during the act, the fact that it lasted so much longer than the act itself was, you know, was really quite, I use the word shocking, really. It was quite a surprise for me anyway. Are there ways that we can, as type 2 diabetics, male or female, are there ways that we can improve our sexual function without medication?
100%. So I do a lot of work with people that are not necessarily just diabetics, but people that are suffering with erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, low libido, the dryness, you know, whether it's male or female. And we do as human beings get very tangled in our head. So we've already told ourselves that we're kind of broken. So sometimes it's about, I always explain it as sometimes we need to just get on a different bus to get to the destination. I think we need to, and this isn't just about diabetes, sometimes this is an age thing as well. We often get in routines in sex and intimacy. And sometimes when a health issue comes along, whatever it might be, we kind of still trying to chug down the same line, doing things the same way. And sometimes we just have to change it. And we can still get to those orgasms. We can still get to that pleasure. But sometimes we have to navigate that in a different way. That might be longer foreplay. It might be, you know, sometimes it isn't about necessarily always getting an erection, which is a really easy thing I get for a woman to say. But there are so many other ways of getting pleasure. And actually, once you take that head thing out of it, often things change and an erection does occur because you've taken it out of the equation. So you don't get tangled up in the psychology of it. And I've worked with many, many diabetics that with breath work, some mindfulness, just taking the goal-based focus out of sex, that actually a lot of that can support it. You know, breath work and mindfulness are a great thing that many of us don't do in the bedroom because we're always thinking of the next thing. We're always trying to please our partner. We want to make it the same as it's always been. And sometimes it is about doing it slightly differently and focusing on how we can get the journey to unfold in a different way. So, you know, even things like spending time massaging each other, have prolonged periods of foreplay where you can just get into a moment, and often things change, you know, because you're just doing it the way you take the pressure off of it, because a lot of it is psychology. You know, I've quite often worked with diabetics, and in Tantra, I'm working with that area. So I work with the genitals. So I'm supporting somebody to work with the breath, to work with mindfulness. And often because they're not with their partner, it's taken that kind of pressure as well. And then suddenly, you know, they do get an erection. It's like, oh my God, you know, and suddenly they realize it's not broke. So they can go back to their partner and, you know, okay, I'm not going to say it happens every time. 100% doesn't. But there's a whole different mindset and a whole different focus, because often, you know, we are very much in our head in sex. So learning things about breath work, tantra, even things like yoga can help with diabetes and things, because again, it's the blood circulation, it's becoming, like you've said, changing your diet. There's lots of things we can do that just, if we do a little bit of all of those, can make such a huge difference. We haven't got to go to yoga every night of the week and start eating lettuce every night, but some tweaks in our diet, some changes in our mindset, you know, approaching things in a slightly different way can make a huge difference.
I can see that. Again, as we talked about before, though, I think it's that comparison between then and now. You want then back again rather than you want a new now.
I think we need to remember sometimes that's not the diabetes or the health condition. Sometimes that's just we're getting a little bit older and things don't quite work the same way. For women, menopause is a huge thing. You know, if you're going through stage, diabetes and the menopause, you're like, what's happening to my body and what is it that's causing these changes? Because menopause can cause a lot of the same symptoms for a woman: dryness, low libido. So it's like we just feel so lost with it, and 100% we want things back the way they were. But as we get older, things aren't the way they were. So therefore, it's about navigating some new lands, and things can be just as exciting in a different way.
I see. Yeah, I see that. And do you tend to work with couples, or do you work with either a man or a woman separately?
So I've worked with both. So a lot of my clients are men who are struggling with things like erectile dysfunction, or they've been through broken relationships and they're struggling. And again, women can trauma, menopause, health conditions, whatever that is. And to be honest, of a certain age, we've kind of got one of those. We've either got a health condition or we've got some sort of broken relationship that's kind of struck our body or our mind in some way that it kind of changes how we perceive intimacy. I think as we get older, we've all got a story behind us, and we all struggle a little bit with some health issues. So it's not an uncommon thing for us as we reach our 40s, 50s and beyond, that we do have to navigate. We'd love sex to be the same as it was in our 20s, but our bodies and actually there's so many different things we can be doing. We kind of get stuck in a rut with sex. I think it does become very much a routine, and intimacy and pleasure. And I always say all of those because they're very different. Pleasure doesn't have to be goal, it doesn't have to be sex. Intimacy, kissing and cuddling and connecting and just being with another human being on a kind of intimate level doesn't have to always involve what we know to be sex.
I think that's a good point. And in terms of approaching you for what you do, you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned the tantric work you do, and I think you do some other you have other tools in your bag when you speak to a client. Do they need to come to you knowing what these tools are and saying, I want that one, please?
No.
I want that one. Or do they come to you and say, well, this is my problem, and then you apply the right tool for the job?
Yeah, so I work a lot with energy as well. So I believe a lot in the meta health stuff. So for example, diabetes in the meta health is very much in an energy perspective, is about relationship dynamics. Sometimes that's about relationship with our partners. Sometimes that's about our parents. Diabetes is often related to periods of stress in your life. So I might work from an energy perspective in looking at how, what was the trigger for the diabetes, because sometimes that's relevant. And actually, sometimes that is about intimate relationships. There's always a starting point quite often with what was the onset. And sometimes we go back to that and look at that. And what was the trigger, and we might use energy work. Sometimes it's about let's manage it in the here and now, which can then is about finding tools to manage it, which is the breath work, the mindfulness, maybe movement, the tantra work. So it really depends on what people are open to explore, and also kind of what they've come with. If they've had it a long time, or they're not sure what the trigger was, or they've got other health conditions as well, which quite often happens. It's not one health condition that can cause challenges in relationships and with your own body. So it's just about seeing where people are at and meeting them there with the tools that I've got.
And you're quite right about root cause. I find with oftentimes with clients that we do this thing called emotion code. We do emotion code work in order to get to the source of how this diabetes thing happened to them, because I remember one particular client came to me, said, Stephen, I don't know what's going wrong. I was okay yesterday, and I've woken up today and I've got type 2 diabetes, but in truth it takes 10 to 15 years to develop this, and the underlying causes can go back much further. I know, for example, when I did the emotion work myself, that the major trigger for me was actually something that happened to me at the age of 8, and it was, I saw it as something completely different to this. It was I was worried about something that was going on with my mum, and I fell off a climbing frame, and anyway, that was the source of everything. And who would have known, but for others, it can be, it can be sexual abuse. It can be a trauma trigger with a big T, or a trauma trigger with a small t, or a collection of them over a number of years.
Sometimes it's one, and it can be significant big traumas and emotional onsets, and then it's just you know, the budgie dies, and that's the one. Not that that's not important, it's important, but it can be something that in the great scheme of things, but that's the trigger, because it's another loss, or it's another relationship that's broken, or it's another element of stress. So all of our health conditions in the kind of meta world and an energy perspective, all of our health conditions, whether it's toothache, headache, you know, bad back, feet, whatever it might be, are related to an emotion. And it's down to the individual whether that's the journey they want to take. It, like, let's unpick where it's come from, because by releasing that we can move forward, because we're literally carrying it around with us. So by letting that go with, like you said, the energy work, or if it's more or less, you know, I want to manage the here and now, because actually that's the most important to me, then that's maybe more the breath work. And a combination of two is heaven, because that means that we can release and change, and even sometimes even just, like you said, identifying what that was is enough. Like once you've realized where it came from, then there's lots of modalities, and I know the work you do is amazing, but there's lots of things that can help us like let that go. And then it's like, okay, so how do we then step back into our power with this? But I understand that not everybody connects with, you know, necessarily going back. They want to focus on the now. Completely get that. And there are tools to support that. Doing both is a perfect combination.
Yeah, and I do get clients who are rather worried about looking back, because, you know, they don't want to see those skeletons, and there's a reason why they shut behind the closet. But it's not invasive. It's not like, I don't know, something like cognitive behavioral therapy, where you might go through and relive it until it becomes, you know, normalized or whatever. And I'm not a great expert in that.
No, and it's not about what I would call the counselling angle of reliving it. It's just like, let's identify the point, and let's then just let it go. We don't have to relive any of it. We just, it's understanding that there was a starting point. And the meta health is amazing. You know, I've even got, you know, today for me, I've got a bit of a backache, and I'm like, okay, what's holding my back? You know, what's pulling me back? And I've already identified it. Once I've identified it, I can, on a real-time level, manage that, which is actually a relationship that's kind of, I'm trying to do too many things at once. It's like, okay, I need to let something go, because I'm feeling that restriction. You know, I've got something going on in my shoulders, which is about, you know, what's trying to push you down and suppress you. Stuff in your throat is about, you know, what can't you talk about? You know, often people in relationships at certain times in their life, you know, I've known someone have a throat infection at certain anniversaries, because it triggers things in the unconscious about getting married, and that was it the right thing to do? And it's very, very, sometimes it can be very deep, but it's very interesting, and particularly for something like type 2 diabetes, to just identify that trigger. And once you have an understanding, and you can just say, okay, I honor that, let it go, it's surprising how that can change your physical health.
Oh, it's amazing. Absolutely amazing. I get amazed every day with this stuff, Lorraine. It's, you know, I was going to, no, perhaps I won't dive into that story, but it's just the amount, the depth at which you can get into with a client by asking just a couple of, you know, fairly innocuous questions of the subconscious mind, and that emotion that's been sitting there for 20, 30. There was one today that's been sitting there for over 30 years for a client. It can have massive ripples, and to find it and to release it, and, you know, to heal from it.
When I left teaching, sorry, interrupt you. I'll just give another example of that. When I left teaching, up until the point of leaving teaching, I had tonsillitis like every term. I had irritable bowel that was really bad. And I also had alopecia. I had mild alopecia. As soon as I gave up teaching, and I didn't even know about mental health at this point, as soon as I gave up teaching, every single one of them stopped. I've never had tonsillitis again, because it was because I couldn't talk about my life. It was a secret. Like, no one in my life knew. And now the irony is, I'm now talking about it with people like you, and quite happy to talk about sex. I spent 20 years not saying anything to anybody apart from those in my little bubble. My hair, where I was literally pulling my hair out metaphorically, it all grew back, and I never had irritable bowel again, because I was in control. Irritable bowel was about losing control. I was back in control. I was in the driving seat of my own life, being exactly who I want to be. I very rarely have what I would call a health condition. I have a bit of backache, tonsillitis. I'm blessed to now know that I can open a book and dive in, or tap into, you know, professionals like yourself, where I can get some help and let it go. But I've never had tonsillitis in, you know, since, because I now speak the truth.
Isn't it amazing that the body can create these very complex metaphors, you know, itself? Because we all deal with euphemisms. You probably deal with a lot of them in your, and you know, these metaphors that we use to avoid going to the actual words and explaining what we're actually feeling. But the body physically creates these metaphors as well, and I continuously find it fascinating. Listen, Lorraine, it's really, really important what you do, and I know many people listening might want to reach out to you and, you know, ask a bit more about your services. What's the best way of contacting you?
So the best place to go is to my website, which is orgasmiclife.me. And there's a page on there. They can see my services. There's a page on there to reach out and book a call. But all of that is in one place. Then that's probably the easiest way. I am on Facebook and LinkedIn and places like that. But if they just want to have a little nose of what I do, or want to make contact to book a call, have a chat, whatever that might be, thank you. Whatever that might be, then they're more than welcome. I'm happy to have a conversation about any challenges around their diabetes or sex, intimacy and pleasure as a general.
That's wonderful. And you know, sometime in the not too distant future, I do want to have you back, because as I say, I think this is a really important subject for anyone who has type 2 diabetes. Obviously for any other health condition it's important too, but that's really my concern. So if you would consider coming back in Definitely. You know, 6-8 weeks, I don't know, however long, we'll work it out. But we want to make this a regular thing, because it's you know, people are diagnosed every day with this condition, and it's worth cycling back again and telling people that there is another way other than just medicating, which, as I say, is very close to my heart. So thank you very much, Lorraine. Really appreciate that. Have a wonderful week. It's Friday now, so have a great weekend. And we shall speak to you again very, very soon. Many thanks for being a great guest. Bye for now.
Bye.